Hello, Be Awesome listeners. This is Joshua Peach, your host, and I am excited as always to be here with you. Episode 75, keeping it local, 3,000 miles away. I got to tell you, first and foremost, Easton, Massachusetts has got this street. It's Bay Road, and it runs the full length of the town. And on one side of the road is Cranberry Bogs, and on the other side of the road is a street known as Cranberry Lane. And I think I've had just about every kid growing up. I've had Marissa Boydie, I had Mark Lamb, and today I have Alisa Evans. And I think we're running out of Cranberry Lane, folks, but they put out some good stock, some great people doing some awesome things. Today we're going to dig into something that I think a lot of people have no idea what they can or can't do regarding financial aid for K-12 schools. And Alisa is an absolute expert in it with her company. That I'm gonna let her dig into you and let you guys know what that is. So Alisa, first and foremost, welcome to the podcast, your first ever podcast.
This is my first ever podcast. Yes. I think we're so good from Cranberry Lane because there was a lot of like ocean spray chemicals that went across every summer. So it's just like we got extra stuff, maybe like Spidey DNA just been pushed into us.
No, you guys are like I say, I don't know who's left. So might have to start moving over to Dean Street. I don't know what's
Rivals.
Yes. It's funny. I have a lot of people that tell me, that they want to hear more of the story, and it's always great when I can, for the last 4 months, like most, if not all of my guests are people that I have a long history with, knowing you since, growing up. And you moved to California. You got married to another local Easton, someone I played hockey with growing up, Ryan Evans. Way unprofessional JV hockey going to the early 90s. He was always much better than I could ever have been. So, but you guys moved to California. You actually, the backstory with you was we actually connected somewhere in like the 2012 or 2013. I think you were working for NAIS, which is an independent school association. So you've been working with private schools primarily for 10 plus years.
Yeah. I started in higher ed, which is what got me to California. I worked for a student loan company out of Boston, and they wanted me to cover the West Coast. And so then I moved to California in 2002. And then I spent the last 10 years in higher ed financially, in K-12 financially, which is very different, but along the same vein. But I felt much better about it because I feel like in K-12, if you don't, the fundamentals in going to Easton Public Schools, I didn't realize how much that was a huge value and a sacrifice for our parents to move to an area that was, more expensive than the city or different areas, where you get that really lower education changes the trajectory of children's lives. Where you go off to college is, you get a choice in a lot of that. I mean, not everybody gets a choice, but you get more choice. And a lot of kids don't get a choice in where they go to lower school or elementary. So I felt really empowered to say that I play a very, very minor, tiny role in changing the trajectory of these kids' lives. You could go to, Compton High School, or you go to Harvard Westlake. But access is where it lies. And I really felt like I had access to the best education as a child. And I want to make sure that other kids have that same ability to be able to go where they want to go, where they're mission appropriate kids, and then have us help them pay for it and get them there.
And so you've been helping pay for it. Your company, tell us a little bit about your company, the background, and what you do. What are some of the coverings you do? And then we'll talk about exactly what financial aid is. Yeah.
Yep. So I started in 2018 with a company called Mission Enrollment. I started. And essentially what I did, I worked for a nonprofit. It's almost my entire adult life I've worked for nonprofit organizations. And working at NAIS, which was the National Association of Independent Schools, my job was to help train schools on how to review financial aid applications. They're really complicated. We're looking at people's tax returns and essentially trying to dictate how much we think you can afford, which just seems so ridiculous. Like, I'm going to tell you how much of your money you should contribute to your kids' education, because there's so many different value levels. Like if you value high education above, say, Starbucks every week, or whatever your value system is, very different. So it's very much a mathematical equation. And so I would train the schools on how to do this work in a platform, mathematical platform. And then they would say, that's awesome, super helpful, thank you. Can you just do it for me? Because this is a big pain in the butt, and I don't really quite understand business taxes and stuff. So in 2018, I thought, you know what, this is crazy. I've been trying to get schools to do all this work, but I love doing this. I love looking at the folders. I love reading the stories of who people are, because every one of these applications is a human, a little human.
Mm-hmm.
And the schools get so busy with the 60, independent schools are like every nonprofit. Everybody does 65,000 jobs, including parking lot duty, right? So I was solely dedicated to sitting in my office and reviewing financial aid folders, and I could give it the time to really come up with the right numbers for families. And so I broke out in 2018 on my own to work with schools directly. So I started with 7 schools across the United States, and now I work with about 35 schools across the country. And I still found that the training was then missing, because schools that couldn't work with me and have, essentially they outsource financial aid to my company, and I have a small team. And if they couldn't afford to use my company and they still needed to learn how to do this because it's complicated, I started Practical and Tactical, which is my training arm. And so I use that to do online courses for financial aid directors or admissions directors. And we do a financial aid conference and everything to get financial aid people, or people that have to do financial aid, aware of how taxes operate, what's the best way to offer financial aid, like this net tuition revenue modeling, saying, we know there are definitely more needy kids than we have ever had in the past that want to go to independent schools. How do we remain sustainable as a school? Because we still have to pay all the bills, but also serve our mission of access for children that can't afford it, but are amazing kids that we want to have in our independent schools. How do we balance that? And so I do a lot of seminars on how to balance net tuition revenue and all that stuff. So I now have about 35 schools, and then I have, I do all this training. So one of the things I have found with the pandemic is that independent schools, because they've got more bandwidth, they're much smaller, they can act, they're independent of the public school and not as many federal standards on them. They are able to act quickly when it says, hey, if we require these 5 things for you to do to be COVID safe, they can make those very quick adjustments. And so they had started in the last couple of months saying, we're getting admissions applications from people everywhere saying, my public school, I don't know if they're going to be ready. I don't know if I feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
Can we go? And then, but we never thought about independent school. I didn't plan for it. So I can't really afford it. So how do we make it all work? So I started building trainings for parents. I do trainings for parents, from time to time, but most of the time I'm just on the reverse side looking at their application saying, oh, please don't tell me this. That was not don't tell me that you still need to take a European vacation and that's really important, but you want financial aid. And so there were things I thought, gosh, if I could just talk to this parent and say, if you just shared your story in a slightly different way,
Mm-hmm.
this would have been a little bit more compelling. Or here's how you present your information in a way that makes sense, and the schools understand that you need help, but you have to pay, everybody's got to pay something, right? Because there's a
Mm-hmm.
cost. So I started doing more parent trainings, and a lot of my trainings, I would work kind of through the schools for their existing population. But when we started talking, I'm thinking there are just public school and just general population, like the independent school, while it's all my world, it's all I do all day, every day. It's a tiny, tiny piece of the K-12 education system.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think there's a lot of good information out there on, even if I wanted to send my kid to a Montessori school, which I love, or I know that I used to remember as a kid, I know that like the rich kids got to go to all the Zavarians, this, that. Yeah.
Yep.
Like I knew that they existed. I just knew that we couldn't go because either I wasn't smart enough or I didn't have the money. Like that's where rich people go. And that's not true. A lot of independent schools, like one of their big pillars of being is being very much global, raising global citizens and supporting families. But they do a terrible job marketing the fact that they do have financial aid available to them to give to families. So it's one of those things I want to do as much as I can now more than ever under my I have training, capabilities. Let me just give people everything they need to know to be able to do this. Even if for a year you want to send your kid during crazy COVID to an independent school, how can you do that without breaking the bank? And maybe then you'll fall in love with Montessori, or you'll fall in love with a Waldorf school, or whatever it might be. And then it might be something that you long game and you say, yeah, I really actually do want this for my child and their education in the next, 5 to 8 years.
Yeah, I filled the not smart enough, so we didn't need to worry about the money issue because my parents couldn't have bought my way into anything that remotely
I'm not
resembled.
sure I would have made it either. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But no, now, coming up on 30 years and a few that I've graduated from high school, I've learned a lot and I've seen a lot. And the big reason why I wanted to have you on before all this COVID stuff to talk about things like financial aid and private schools and everything, because there's something like 27,000 independent private categorized schools in the country. Most people don't know that. And they go from everything from a small country day school to a large, like out here, Milton Academy, which is a prestigious boarding school. It's almost $60,000 a year, but they have tons of opportunity for people to explore financial aid options, or if your child is truly gifted, they have even discounted scholarship programs. So this whole COVID thing hit. March 16th, schools are closed. You're in California. You guys were like the first ones that just said everything's off. Like we're shutting it all down.
We went on summer break March. My birthday's in March. Right after my birthday, March 4th, 5th-ish, we went on summer break. I have 2 kids. I have a 5-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. So Aiden and Delaney go on to spring break, and we're like, awesome, this is good. And then we never went back.
Yeah.
And it was horrible for every parent. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and that was and I tell people all the time in education, like, you guys need to celebrate a little bit because, if your superintendent or head of school came to you on January 1st and said, hey, we're in a great economic time, we're very low unemployment rates, the country's doing great, we're bringing jobs back, we're doing all this stuff. I mean, we're just running on all cylinders, and that's great. This is January 1st, 2020. And then they said, but on March 16th, we're going to throw a little button hook at you. We're going to shut everything down. You're going to have to do something you've never done before, which is called distance learning. You're going to have to do it for kids, young kids, old kids, all kids. We're going to lock you in your house with your family that may or may not like you forever. And you're going to have to perform at your top level to ensure that these kids get everything that they want. Now, granted, it wasn't flawless. It wasn't like a flawless execution. But our educators and our education system really stepped up, and they did the best possible job that they could, and they did fantastic. That said, we're now 4 months smarter, 4 months more into this thing. There's a whole bunch of realizations between, in-person learning, hybrid learning, distance learning, more advancements with the capability of distance learning. And parents are worried. Parents that have kids in public schools are worried. And private schools too, but the public school parents they're going crazy. They're on all of the social media, and they're talking about all these different options and ideas with no experience. So they're like, I don't know what I want to do, but I don't want my kid going to public school, and I don't want them distance learning, and I don't want and that's your right, and that's what you say, figure it out. I never knew what financial aid was. I went to community college. It was like $1,000 a semester. And, I never understood what financial aid was. I never knew who had to qualify for it, how much you have to pay back of it, how that all works. So, I guess let's start off with what exactly is financial aid.
Yeah. So, I'll even take it one step back further, because I will say to people, I work with independent schools, and they're like, oh, you mean like charter? I'm like, no, not, in fact, not at all. Like opposite of that. It's not charter at all. So just because you and I, because this is our world, we talk about independent schools, I think it's just an assumption of what that means. So you have independent schools and you have private schools, and they are actually sort of distinctly different. So as parents, like if we're talking about, if they're thinking about non-public, meaning you have to pay tuition to send your kid to school, there are 2 kind of major groups you're looking at. The independent schools are completely independent of any third-party organization. So all of the funding, all of the governance, all is contained within that school. A private school is usually connected to a third party that has some oversight and or has some of the, shares some of the expenses. So a Catholic school is funded in some ways by the Catholic school, the Catholic church they're affiliated with. They either are giving free rent or lower rent because they're on the same campus. So you'll notice if you ever look at, as you're going to start, because the first thing I'm going to say to you is forget the cost of the school. You need to find the right fit for your kid. And even if it's short term, just finding a fit. If your thought is, well, private school equals faith-based or Catholic or Jewish or whatever it might be, and not knowing what is independent school another religious school, or is it something totally different? So it's simply how they're organized, like their government organizing. So the private school's affiliation to the church lends themselves to have a lowered tuition. So if you are concerned about the cost of tuition, you're going to get great education. Do your research and find the right fit for you guys. But when you look at the cost, you are always generally going to see that an independent school, which is, kind of one for all and all for one, the funding, everything comes directly from the organization. There's no third party oversight, which gives themselves more ability to have different types of class styles. They can do not whatever they want. They still have to follow the rules of like childcare, right? But they have way more flexibility. So they're a little bit more expensive than your faith-based schools, because the faith-based schools do have additional governance that happens with them. So those are the two types of kind of non-public schools that we talk about. And then they break off into these different subsets. So in an independent school, you have, like the college prep one, like a Milton would be like sort of a college prep type school, right? They're trying to get you ready for college, or a boarding school. And some boarding schools have even day school components where there are people that just live locally that go to the school during the day, but don't stay there and board there. And then you have Montessori schools and Waldorf schools. So I would say the first thing you do as you're in this panic mode about what am I going to do about my kids' education, first thing you want to do is say, like, what kind of education style do I like? What do I find interesting? And do some research on those different types of, I don't want to say pedagogy because that's such a fancy term, but just what's good for your kid, or what learning style would be good for your kid. And then start looking at the schools, and then we can talk through financially. But I think that's one of those things.
That's going to put them in shell shock, is the learning style, because if they've been in public school for any period of time, I think one of the, the two kind of groups of people are the real young kids, the parents that have really young kids, and then the parents that have kids in high school, because the kids in high school, they want them to finish out their high school career, hopefully in person. And there's a higher likelihood. Lots of the private schools are already like, hey, we're going back to school in August so that we can be in person. Like, they're doing everything to be in person. They're smaller enrollment sizes allows them to fit accordingly for distance learning, even before COVID. And then the younger kids, the parents are just like, my kids can't look at a tablet for 4 hours a day or a computer. So those are the two kind of groups. And both of those groups are going to struggle with looking at different learning styles. Like Montessori is completely different from public learning. A religious private school, which we talked about, the tuition's probably gonna be lower. If you're not highly religious, probably ain't gonna be a fit. But if you try to make it fit, it's gonna be a whole lot different than what. I went to Catholic school when I was in first and second grade. Didn't make it past second grade. Sister Teresa didn't like me. That was when I used to be able to hit you with a ruler still. And I got it. I think she's got a good, if she's still alive, she's like 170. So she
they all are.
Yeah, she didn't like me too much. But that's I think first nugget of knowledge for people is you're going to have to go into this with a completely open mindset, because you are going to experience and see. And it doesn't mean that public school is wrong. It doesn't mean private school is wrong. It's just different. And that's something we've gone through, that I've gone through with lots of experience on this stuff. It's just different. And you have to find something, and you might find something that you're like, wow, I wish I found this before COVID. I wish I didn't have to go look at this because COVID hit. I wish I wouldn't looked at it because my son or daughter wasn't a fit to where they were. So sorry to cut you off. I just had to.
No, but the silver lining in that is, so I was a public school kid. I mean, when my parents couldn't send me to private school. And, when we had kids, of course, I worked for a National Association of Independents. So I'd seen every school campus you can imagine. And I'm like, I can't not send my kids to private school now or independent school, because I've seen all these amazing things. And we've talked about this. Like, if I had gone to a Montessori school or knew of one that was nearby, I would have loved math. I would have loved all the, there were things about schooling that would have been different, and it would have been better for someone like me. And, whereas my sister, she really excelled in the public school system. I think the upshot for everybody is that even if you send your kid to an independent school for a year, it'll give them such a different, unique and different experience. And for me as a parent, I was terrified. I'm like, I'm going to screw this whole, even home learning, and my kids go to independent school. Unless you're sending over like Rosie the Jetsons computer maid to, educate my kid, I'm afraid I'm going to mess this thing up. I had to do a lot more. I mean, I've been in the independent school world for years, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what is the 10 chain? What's the bead system? What's the movable alpha? Like all this stuff I had to quickly as a parent learn to be able to teach my daughter, and then also run my company at the same time. And so it became this crazy situation. So I think you'll find that even if you were going to, before all COVID, when I would talk to parents that would come to admissions fairs and they'd say, I would love to send my kid to Westover School in Connecticut, or all these, Phillips Exeter or whatever. I would say to them that, it's got to be the right fit for the family, but it's going to open your eyes to this like totally different educational system that you're going to have great experience with. Likely, if someone said to me, should I save my money, which a lot of parents, I'm going to save my money and send my kid to a really expensive high school. I would say through NAIS, and we did tons of research and data analysis in the last 60 years on children and learning, is that if you're going to put your money anywhere, you put it in ages 0 to 5. That sets a great foundation. So even now, if you've got old kids, I'm sorry, I can't help you. No, if you've got really young ones, here is this opportunity to send them, even if for 1 year or 6 months or whatever it might be, to an independent school. It's those foundational years that really help lay the groundwork for independent learning, or being able to work in groups, or project-based learning, all the stuff that all of us do now that work, that never learned that in the public. That's not part of the curriculum of public schools, is a lot of this the way people go out and have a job later. So if I was going to put my money anywhere, and we still have limited funds, is in the lower, pre-K through age 5. So if you had to pick, if you had no choice, you had to pick, that's what we would recommend. I would recommend you put your money into those lower school ages. And then that sets a really good baseline for them. But so for financial aid's sake, and also lower school is cheaper. So it's less expensive than high school. So you've got that going for you.
I did the Montessori, the 0 to 5. There was a Montessori school in West Bridgewater.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't help me.
I think you'd be surprised. You're a great public speaker. Right?
Yeah, no, it definitely did some wonders. I wish I could have stayed through the program.
The only awesome thing I got from high school, and my mom and dad always loved it, was I would not get great grades, and my mom would be like, but then, I used to get the little note, like, I got a D-, and then they give you like the little note, like, it doesn't show up to class or something. My note would be, a pleasure to have in class.
Oh yeah, I always had it.
I don't understand that. How is it? I was like, Mom, I was always working on my social skills. See how well this has turned out for me.
I found a treasure trove. I don't know if you listened to the Liza Toulousan podcast, but we hadn't talked in like 27 years. And I found this treasure trove of like report cards and quizzes and all this stuff. And Mrs. Schleicher retired this year. I found out she was retiring. And I actually found a quiz that I got that she gave me a 68 on. The last question, I drew a picture of myself and it said, I love chemistry, like in an air bubble. And then behind it was somebody saying I'm burning, laying down underneath the safety shower. And so we did a part of the video of the podcast was saying thank you to Ms. Schleicher. And I sent her some Be Awesome shirts, and she sent me a thank you card that was made the periodic elements. I'm like, she's got the periodic elements all dialed in.
Of course she does.
Yeah. So,
that's awesome.
But I had a pleasure to have in class with my D's and F's.
Does not do her homework, a pleasure to have in class.
Yeah, a pleasure to have in class. So let's walk me through, like, I've never considered, my kids are in public schools. I've never even considered it. It's always looked at it like too expensive.
That's where the rich kids go,
right. That's where they're all, there's no opportunity for me. I make X amount of dollars. So I don't make enough to pay for it, but I make too much to qualify for it, is probably what I feel like I make too much,
but I
Right.
don't feel like I can afford it is a very common thing. And, for all of us that went off to college, me later in life, but went off to college, our parents would apply for financial aid. They'd maybe get some financial aid in the FAFSA, which is the higher ed's financial aid platform. And you say in your mind, well, I make more money than my parents made, right? However, just to give like just general statistics about financial aid in the K through 12 world, the average family applying for financial aid in the K through 12 school makes $150,000 a year. That is not anyone in the lowest quintile of income.
Hmm.
That is kind of classically middle income for most areas. That, I mean, to be able to go to an independent school, that's sort of the standard thing. So if you
Hmm.
say, well, I make $85,000 a year, I probably won't qualify. And I would say to you, no, I mean, do you think you could pay $30,000 a year out of your extra money? This is supposed to be out of your money that doesn't go to cover housing, clothing, food. And you would say, no, there's no way I have the money. Like, exactly. We're not crazy to think that you can make $85,000 a year and afford a $30,000 a year tuition. That's crazy business. So I think the biggest misconception is that the financial aid for K through 12 is like the FAFSA. It is in that you have to apply every year, you fill out a form and things like that. But the criteria is incredibly different. The FAFSA has probably 12 questions now. It's very kind of fairly easy to fill out these days. Ours has like 25 questions. And we ask you things like, do you have unusual expenses? Do you care for an elderly parent, which is now starting to happen? Do you have a child with special needs that costs you a lot of money in occupational therapy, or all of these other expenses that go beyond here's what I take in for income and here is what goes out every month. And so we're trying to get to a place where it says, okay, we want them to be able to live. Like, nobody should be like living in a box and sending their kid to Harvard Westlake. What we're saying is that what is reasonable for you to manage, and it's not just a one-year thing. You got to long game this thing because your kids don't go to, and well, in COVID, perhaps you just suffer through and say, I'm going to get this thing done for 1 year. But basically you're applying for, you're thinking about it now, and your kid's going to be in school for the next 8 to 10 or 12 years, depending on what schooling you're looking at. And so you got to long game this thing. And so we ask you things like, well, how much do you think you can afford to pay? And you might say, well, my mom and dad can give us a couple $1,000, or they love the idea of my kid going. So like using your other resources that are even beyond your income, we ask you things like that. Where the money comes from is usually a question of like, well, does it come from the government? That's always a question. Does independent school money, financial aid, come from the government? Well, the good news is, again, that we're independent. So good news, bad news, no money comes from the government. It all comes from fundraising, or they might have endowments left from a very wealthy family to fund financial aid. So it's almost one of the second largest line items on a school's budget, on an independent school's budget. And so it's essentially discounting the tuition. So financial aid in the K through 12 world is a grant. So it's not something that a family has to pay back. We're establishing what we think you can afford to pay, and then that's what you pay for that seat. There will be other kids in that classroom that are paying double or a 3/4 of that, or sometimes even less than that. But it's discounted by the school, and then the school is able to cover the expenses of that using either from their the money that they brought in from tuition, or they draw from their endowment monies every year and offer financial aid. Because the goal of the school is to have a very diverse population. Independent schools, one of the big pillars of independent school, is to have diversity, equity, inclusion. They want to have kids from all different backgrounds. They don't want a bunch of rich kids going to school with a bunch of rich kids. That is not going to give a really diverse and real world experience. And there is huge value in having kids from all different spectrums, in all different backgrounds, and an independent classroom. And they have the capacity to do, usually schools is about 20% of their population are on some form of financial aid. And so when you think about filling out this form, it's not like college where it's like, I fill this out and I probably won't get anything. And so I'm gonna have to take out all these loans that I'm gonna have to pay over the next 10 or 15 years, which, by the way, the kids are not gonna pay you back, because I am still never gonna be able to pay my parents back for what they paid for my schooling in higher ed. And borrowing against your retirement, those are all like really tough decisions that parents are making with college. But with K through 12, because it's a grant, you don't have to pay it back, but it's something that you just have to plan for. And once we set your benchmark of saying, okay, we think you can afford to pay, $5,000 a year. you can assume, and you have to reapply every year, just like the FAFSA, but you reapply every year. And if it's 5,000 this year, it's not going to be 12,000 next year because your kid's not awesome. We don't love them that much. So we're going to bump up your tuition. It is pretty well set because people's income doesn't change all that much. Unfortunately, nobody's going from, your tuition increases, the schools increase tuition by about 3 to 4% every year at the K through 12 level to cover the expenses of facilities and teacher salaries and all that stuff. As a parent, your income goes up by, if you're a W-2 person, like 1.5%. So families start to do this, right? The tuition keeps going up and their income's not increasing. So they start to, it starts to outpace families' capacity to pay. So we always encourage families that are like, well, I can make maybe this first year work, but as this goes along, or I have a second kid, it's going to be impossible for me to cover the tuition. So we're going to try to have you apply right out of the gates for financial aid. Even if you just get a little bit of financial aid that first year, if anything else, the higher the tuition and the amount of money that you earn, you're going to be asked to pay roughly the same amount each year so that we're not getting you in, having you love the school and then say, oh, guess what? Good news for us, bad news for you. You love our school. Now we're going to charge you double. That just doesn't happen. So you have pretty good consistency in the K through 12. And that's what I do. All I do is look at financial aid applications and tell the schools, here's what they can afford to pay. And then we do the same process every single year for families. It sounds like an invasive, like a really uncomfortable process. It's an online application. When you're looking at schools, every school is laid out the same way. And you know this in the K through 12 world. It's like they have an admissions tab. They have like about us. Under the admissions tab, you will always find usually what the admissions criteria. Some schools you have to take a test, to make sure this is going to be a right fit for your kid. And they'll have either a thing that says tuition and fees, or they'll have a thing say affordability. And when you click on that, you're going to see what the tuition is, and you'll panic a bit. But then you're going to see very close by, and here's our financial aid process, right? So every school will tell you what's the process for how to fill out an application for financial aid. It's going to be an online application. It's going to be that you need to submit your tax returns from, usually it's the 2019 tax returns, so the tax returns that were just due July 15th, they're usually April. Or they'll look at prior year taxes, the 2018s, just to get it, because no one's income really changes all that much, short of COVID. People's income weren't really changing all that much. And so we can use kind of older tax returns to get a rough estimate. And then you submit that stuff, get it in early, because that shows that you've got, you want to get this thing done. I can't do my job until I have your taxes. I mean, I'd love to just make assumptions on your income, but we need the trust but verify. We have to make sure it's correct. And then once that's done, then the school can make their decision and get you an award. And for families that are in COVID right now, what you made in 2019 is certainly no longer reflective of what you're making in 2020. So this year is going to be super difficult for the schools, because they're going to say, how do we assess someone's capacity to pay? Because once COVID's done, if you work at a place that's been sheltered and then you go back, it's like you went from awesome until you weren't. And now you go back to what you were making before. And so this might be a year that we say, oh, well, this year you could only afford to pay $8,000. And then next year it's probably closer to 12. But we'll tell you, under normal circumstances, still filling out this application, you probably can afford to pay this mathematically once you get back to work. But for right now, we know it's crazy COVID, so they're awarding people with almost like two separate awards. They're what their normal financial aid would be, and then sort of a COVID-specific award to help kind of balance that out for families. But it's a pretty straightforward process. I wouldn't be afraid of it. You want to give yourself like 45 minutes to an hour to fill it out, simply because the questions, you don't want to just rush through it, because I look at those answers that you give. So if you just put zeros everywhere, that also tells me that you're not really willing to go through this process. And it makes it super difficult for me to make judgment calls on, what kind of extra money do you have? What kind of discretionary money do you have? You can never give too much information. Some people are afraid, well, if I tell you too much, then it's going to be too much. No, what I hate is when I'll say, how much do you think you can afford to pay? And they say nothing. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, that's not super helpful, because nobody pays $0, right? There's very There's not much there. You have to pay something, because if you're paying nothing for your child's education in an independent school, you don't really have any skin in the game,
Hmm.
and you don't have a vested interest in the support. You're not really invested in it. Even if it's $500, you're invested in some way. So schools like to see that, they're willing to take a huge discount because they want your child to be in their school, but they also want you to feel like invested in it as well.
Right.
And so financially, it's sort of the main thing you get. But if you have a child that you're thinking about putting into a school that has uniforms, or they require certain, nobody's going on class trips right now, but if there are other extras that go with it, we always used to say in higher ed, there's the cost of tuition, and then there's the cost of education. It's like all sorts of other stuff in between there. So when you're doing your budgeting and you think, oh, great, it's $500 a month, I got this. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, it's $250 a month for this other thing. And then you get food, and you get uniforms, you get whatever it might be, this rando activity fee or something. Now you're talking $750 a month. Well, that's a big difference. So schools also offer financial aid. They call it supplemental support. So they'll meet you where you're at. So if you're on a 85% discount on tuition, they're likely to discount the extras at about that same rate or something similar. So if you have to have a laptop, they might even just give you a laptop, or they're going to give it to you at a deeply discounted rate, or prom tickets, or they want these kids to have the same exact experience as the kids that have paid full price and their parents can afford it, because the experience is important, and making sure that everybody has that same experience. And so it's not like you just have to plan for one thing and then they're going to make you pay all these other fees. They try to meet you where you're at, so that it's covered, so that your kid has the same experience as any other kid at that school.
Mm-hmm. That is a lot in a little amount of time. But I think the biggest things that I take away from listening to you is, one, doesn't matter what you make. I mean, if 150, and by the way, $150,000, it was a calculator that was out recently, and I was plugging in all sorts of numbers, and it was either $120,000 or $150,000 family income is considered lower middle class today. Like it's not, so
certainly in California it is.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So
one day I'll get to buy a house once my kids are out of private school.
So the first takeaway is, regardless of what you make, especially right now, 20% of people are making 150 grand a year are applying for financial aid. If you're making, even if you're making $150,000 a year,
more than that,
it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to apply for it.
If you don't think you can afford it, because people say, well, what's the maximum? They're like, they want me to run the numbers on the phone with them.
Well, you can't go into this thing thinking that it's going to be a free ride. That's all things with private schools. You're going to have to put something in, like you say, skin in the game. Private school is all about involvement. The private school mindset is that there's involvement. That's involvement with activities. There's a community, especially in certain and specific targeted types of independent private schools. Make sure parents are scrambling and they're just going crazy trying to think about what the best they can do for their kid is. It doesn't necessarily need to be the most expensive. Do your homework, do lots of tours, be calling the local schools. One of the things you have to figure out is what your willingness is and how dedicated you are, in my opinion, to the success of your child in school. So we can go the easy route and just say, hey, we're just going to put our kid on a bus, or he can just go in he or she can just go in his, I've got two boys, so I'm just keep saying he, because I'm referencing them. They can just get on the bus every day. And if they don't get on the bus, they'll just get on their Chromebook and do the work or whatever. And that's fine. Or you could say, you know what, I'm fully invested that I want my child to have the best possible education, and I'm willing to do X, Y, Z. And that's different for everybody. And there's no right answer to that.
No, there's not.
You could have a willingness to drive. I know people that are driving their kids 50, 70 miles a day each way to get the best possible education that's the best possible fit for them. And then I know other people that listen to that story and they go, oh my God, that's crazy. I could never do that. So you have to
I could not.
Figure out where you're at and what your capacity is as a parent, and then and then marry that with the best solution for your child. So not to just take the first pick, just I'm going to private school. I'm sending my kid to private school because Alisa and Josh said to, because it's going to be great and I can get financial aid. So the first thing is, tour, look around to see what your child likes. Make sure your child is fully involved in this space, not just making it like all about you and just realizing that that's what you want to do. So that's step one: tour, child involvement, determination, and I hate to say it, you fall in love with it. And, should they do the financial aid application before they do the tour or after the tour?
So that's a good question. So like I said in the beginning, find the right fit for your kid first. And this virtual, you can do virtual tours. They have all sorts of virtual shadow days. Independent schools have that dialed in now. I would say just ignore cost for the moment. I know that sounds crazy, but ignore cost for the moment. Find the right fit and have like a 1, 2, or 3 in my top 3 schools I'm thinking about. And then I actually wouldn't even fill out the financial aid form next. The next thing I would do, because you're going to get stuck on question number 20, which everybody gets stuck on, is how much do you think you can afford to pay? So what you need to do for yourself, and you sit with your spouse or yourself and grandma and grandpa and whoever else and say, I'm going to do my budget. So if you need help budgeting, there's a bunch of budgeting tools out there. This is how much we bring in. This is how much we have. What can we afford to do? And have that number in your head, because that's going to be a question. Because even if the math suggests you can afford to pay more, you might have extenuating circumstances. So it's super important for you to do the budget and say, this is how much we can afford. If the school comes back and says, listen, we can't even meet you halfway there, then you know that that's not the right, even though it's the right fit for you academic wise, it's not going to be the right fit for you cost wise, because you have to be able to long game this. So you might have to go to, school 2 or 3. I mean, this is a good process for looking for colleges too, but do your budget first and then you fill out the financial aid application. And it's going to be a lot easier to fill it out when you know what you're spending your money on. I think that's a skill we should have taken. Like, we were busy taking algebra with, I'm pretty sure every year there's no, you have to file your algebra taxes. But if someone had showed me how to do budgeting and financial management, I would have been in a much better position. And I think most adults, most of our friends in our 40s are like, ooh, does anybody have an Excel spreadsheet on how to do a budget? I always just keep I keep a little bit extra money in the bank, and then some days I have like $5 left. And how did this happen? So finding budgeting tools is pretty easy online. NerdWallet always has a couple of good ones. I know people are into the Dave Ramsey thing, but you can get way more simplified. Do that budget first, and that'll help you to say, you know what? Yeah, we probably can. I say to my husband every year, I'm like, what the hell did we spend our money? What did we spend our money on before this? Because how have we been able to manage this? I'm like, we must have been reckless with our money.
Yep.
Like, no, we just don't do some of the things, or we just think a little bit more about things when we're making decisions. And like, when my kid's sick, I'm like, you're not that sick. I already paid for this day. So unless you're on death's door, you're probably going to go to school today. Because I've already paid for it. I'm not paying for a babysitter on top of the day I already just paid for. Ain't going to happen. So my kids don't stay home very often, but yeah, that's the next step, is getting that budget. And then you fill out your financial aid application as part of that kind of next step. And communication with the school is critical. Because we're in an odd time frame, because timelines is usually what I talk about next with families. So that's going to be the hard part, because when you apply for financial aid, you usually apply between October and March, as in October of 2019 through March of 2020 for your kids to start basically next week for September. So you're always applying for the year ahead. So it is now already August, and school is going to start in like 30 seconds. What do we do? Did we miss it for this calendar year? And the answer is no. And I know that because I'm still processing financial aid applications. This is a unique year in that you can still apply for admission and you can still apply for financial aid right now at most schools, because if they have openings, they're going to absolutely be willing to talk to you and we can take you in. If you're saying like, I can manage this for the next, half a year, there are schools that have second semester. So you could kind of deal with this through December and then start in January at an independent school. And you would still fill out the application right now. Come October, that's when you'd start applying for the next year ahead. So if you say, I love this, this is great, I think I want to continue at this school, then you want to get yourself on the normal cycle of applying for financial aid. And once your kid's in, it's not like, you're not reapplying for admission every year. Once you're in, and then you would just follow the more normal cycle, which is starting to fill out your application between like October, November, and all the way through like December, January timeframe. And then the school will give you your award notification with the time of your contract for the next calendar year. But this is an off year. So even if on the websites you see, so you go to the admissions tab on a school's website and affordability or tuition and fees or
Mhm.
financial aid. Sometimes they'll call it indexed tuition, which just means financial aid. You will see sometimes deadline dates of January 30th or March 1st or whatever. Ignore those, reach out to the school, find out if they're still offering admission and financial aid, and then just go ahead and fill out the application, because they just may not even have updated the website at this point. So don't worry too much about that, the website dates at this point.
That is great. I think you covered all the bases. I don't think you missed anything. I went through the slide deck you had. I think we've got it all covered. I think people that are worried considering other options should know that they're not bound to anything. And the only thing they're bound to is if they just determine themselves whether they qualify or not. Let someone like you or the schools determine their qualifications and what they can or can't afford to give their child a different education. Well, this is fantastic. Glad we got to catch up.
Yeah.
And can people get a hold of you? Are you?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, so obviously my people back east,
Mhm.
I don't typically talk to, I mean, I work with schools that work with families, but it's the summer and I would rather you fill this form out properly instead of me having to try to fix things on the back end. So as families have questions, or, I worked with a ton of schools across the country. So if you say, hey, have you heard of this school? What are your thoughts on that school? I am happy to help out in any way. Do you have my email? Or Mission Enrollment is the name of my company. So it's just missionenrollment.com.
Mhm.
And if you click on contact us,
Yeah.
it's going to give you this little form, but you can certainly put my email and my phone number on there. I am
Yeah.
on the West Coast, so please don't call me at 9 a.m. in Easton. Although I do have young kids, so I'll probably be up, but I wouldn't be psyched about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to help anybody get through it. I can tell you as a parent on the other side of this, while we do sacrifice to send our kids to an independent school, the return on investment is tenfold. And I know you feel the same way about your kids in independent schools. I just wish that I could have done this same thing, or but I mean, we had a great education, but they're on 10 acres of grapefruit groves out here in California. And so I'm just like, every time I go to their school, I'm like, can I just like hang out here?
Mhm.
Just like can I work over the bridge over there, like a troll under the bridge, and just
Mhm.
hang out at the school? Just be around here. So yeah, it'll be worth every penny, and you will never get thanked for it, just so you know. Like, don't expect, like, you got 20 years before they're going to say, oh, thank God you did that for me.
Yeah. Well, you don't even recognize it or know it as a child. Like when
No.
we've been very fortunate. I mean, we joke around sometimes about going to school in Easton, but Easton was a great
Exceptional.
growing up, an exceptional opportunity for us to grow up. And there's tons of public schools that are in a similar boat, but it's one of those things is like one size doesn't fit all. We have a choice in what kind of car we drive, what house we want to buy, the clothes we want to wear. But a lot of times as children, we don't have the choice of what school we want to go to. And a lot of the time it's bound by parents feeling like that's the only option. And right now there are other options. And I'm just seeing a mass exodus of people that are really confused and worried and concerned. And this is something that gives them that breath that says, okay, well, maybe we can at least look. We should explore. We shouldn't have any door that's closed. So this is amazing. I'll put all your contact information on
Yeah.
the show notes, and I really appreciate everything you're doing. Great to catch up.
Yeah, you too. You too.
This
Keep doing all you do. I love listening to these podcasts. They're amazing. And all of my Cranberry Lane peeps. One of these days when I try to come to Boston once a year.
Yep.
I bring my kids there because they gotta know what Dunkin' Donuts is.
Yeah.
Critical.
Yep.
And I haven't been down the street in a while, but I feel like we should do some sort of a reunion of
Yeah.
sorts.
Do a be awesome Cranberry Lane episode
Yeah,
with all you
absolutely.
guys. You guys have put out some great podcasts. All of you did your first podcast with me, so you
Oh,
all did
really?
great. Knocked it out of the park. Yep. So
We'll do a once annual game of Spy Free, and only people from Cranberry Lane might even know what that game is. But it's an incredibly dangerous game of flashlight tag in the dark, and somehow our parents let us do it. I won't even let my kid like walk across the street alone during
yeah.
the day in broad daylight. So
Yeah.
yeah, we were very fortunate.
You guys didn't have much traffic over there.
No, we did not. No, we did not.
So, well, this is
All right, thanks,
fantastic. You
Josh. I
enjoy the day.
appreciate it.
Appreciate you. Thanks for doing this for us. And hopefully, if we just have one parent that this helps, then that
Yeah.
made all the difference. So,
Yeah. Awesome.
That'll do it for episode 75. My dog is going crazy, so I think it's time to give her a walk. Fortunately, she didn't bark at the milkman when he stopped by. So, really appreciate you, listeners out there, keeping this thing going and all the positive feedback and things that you want to hear. We're going to keep the things local as much as possible. So, anybody local in the Easton area that wants to promote their business, talk about what they're doing, how they're weathering this storm, as always, you got an open invitation. You can come on anytime. Just let me know. I know you guys are all working hard trying to keep things rolling, and getting time on the podcast is tough, but the mic is always on and waiting for you. And I've got just amazing people in my life. How fortunate am I? I don't know too many folks that can say that they've had all these guests with 30 plus year history that still want to talk to you at some capacity. So I consider myself a very, very lucky human, and appreciate all the people that are out there that are supporting, encouraging, and working towards positive outcomes in this very difficult time. So you can find me on all social media, Instagram, YouTube. I've got a channel. Please subscribe, and like that. The more listens and likes, they start putting commercials on. I think I get like $4 for that. It is exciting. But Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, everywhere. Just look for Be Awesome. So drop me a line, an email, josh@beawesome.com. That's BEAUSM for all the first time listeners. That's how we spell it here. And remember, if you can be anything, be awesome.